Hey there, Elijah and I are back, and we want to share with you today the reasons why you do not want to move to Norfolk. And we're going to start right now. Before I get started, I should mention there are many great reasons to move to Norfolk. It is a beautiful city, and I personally would love to live in the Ghent area or Larchmont if I could afford it, or possibly up in the Bayside area. But in this video, we're covering reasons why you do not want to move to Norfolk. The first thing I'm going to mention, and you may have heard me mention this in some of my other videos, is flooding. Norfolk sits around 7 feet above sea level. We are close to the ocean. So obviously we are prone to flooding, not just in Norfolk, but throughout the Hampton Roads area. So here's a map of the Hampton Roads area, right? This is the south side of Hampton Roads. Here's Norfolk specifically. When we talk about Hampton Roads, we're talking about Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Suffolk. We're even talking about the north side with Newport News and Hampton. But specifically Norfolk, I'm going to show you guys the flood map according to riskfactor.com. Okay, all these blue spots are flooding areas. Now let's eliminate the minimal and the minor flooding. Okay, let's just look at the moderate. Okay, now let's look at the major. Here's the major flooding areas. And you'll see on the west side of Norfolk, we definitely have a whole lot more major flood areas. Let's take it a step further and look at the severe areas and only the extreme. So you could see there is some extreme flooding in Norfolk, and not just Norfolk. That kind of applies throughout all of Hampton Roads, but I would say Norfolk definitely is up there on the list for flood prone areas. The city of Norfolk, according to riskfactor.com, has almost 58,000 properties that are at risk of flooding within the next 30 years. That's 85% of the homes in Norfolk that are at risk of flooding. In addition to property damage, flooding can also cut off access to utilities, emergency services, transportation, just your ability to get to work. Flooding can affect your day-to-day life. Having lived here for almost 10 years now, I haven't experienced a whole lot of flooding. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we get those nor'easters, or Florida sends us the tail end of one of their hurricanes, and we definitely have flooding. So it's something you need to be aware of. Another thing to consider with flooding is flood insurance. Oftentimes it is not an option. It is required by FEMA. Feel free to check out FEMA's website again for more information on that. But the city of Norfolk has taken action over the years to make the city flow better for the flooding that we have, the rains that we have. And because of that, FEMA has recognized Norfolk and took Norfolk from a class 9 down to a class 8, saving people on average about $66 a year on their flood insurance costs. On average, what I see for flood insurance cost is anywhere from $400 a year up to $2,400 a year, but I would say on average it usually ends up being close to about $100 a month. For many people, paying for flood insurance and living in a flood zone is just normal life. But if you're hearing this and you're like, I don't want nothing to do with that, I got good news. There are plenty of areas in Norfolk, outside of Norfolk, that are outside of a flood zone. So if that matters to you, we can definitely find you options that are not in a flood zone. Another reason you may not want to move to Norfolk is traffic. This obviously will depend on where you work and where you're commuting to. The main thing to consider when we're talking about traffic in Norfolk is the tunnels. If you are working anywhere over here in the west part of Hampton Roads and you have to travel through this tunnel or either one of these tunnels in the midtown, you're definitely going to want to consider that, because tunnel traffic can sometimes be pretty bad depending on if there's a wreck and certain times of day. Plus, there's also tolls to consider if you are traveling through the tunnels on a regular basis. So these two tunnels right here should be avoided if possible. I would say the worst tunnel is the one right up north here going to the north side of Hampton Roads. If you do work over in Langley or Fort Eustis, or you're on the north side working, you probably don't want to live in Norfolk, because this tunnel is probably the worst. It's not always bad, it just depends on the time of day. But again, if there's a wreck, it might be a 2-hour drive to just get across the water there. And sometimes during certain times of day, the traffic on 264 and I-64 right here where it intersects sometimes gets a little backed up, but overall it's not too bad. Another thing to consider if you are moving to Norfolk is public transportation. Norfolk has public transportation, but I would say it's minimal depending on what you're used to. I don't think you're going to be able to get by without a car unless if you work in downtown and you live in downtown. You could probably do just fine without a car. Now, you could see the bus routes here. Most of the buses run every 15 to 30 minutes. Here is the train. It runs from downtown Norfolk all the way over to the edge of Norfolk over to Virginia Beach. And that train runs about every 15 minutes, but it doesn't take you to a lot of places. There's not a lot of options. So I would say that the public transportation in the city of Norfolk is limited. Another thing to consider if you're moving to Norfolk is the pollen. We actually have high pollen levels in the Hampton Roads area in general. Most of Virginia Beach is worse than Norfolk, but it's still something to be aware of if you have allergies. If you drive a black vehicle like me, you have to wash it a whole lot every spring because you can see the layer of pollen just cover your vehicle. The last thing I'm going to mention is weather. Norfolk can experience severe weather, hurricanes. I would say tail end of hurricanes is all I've ever really seen. But nor'easters and other storms can happen anytime you're surrounded by a large body of water, aka the Atlantic Ocean. As I mentioned earlier, these severe storms can lead to flooding, so just be aware of that. Having lived here for 10 years now, I haven't really experienced any hurricanes, but it is always a possibility, and we have had some pretty intense storms. Also, living in Virginia, we are technically in the South, and we do have hot summers and some pretty hot temperatures. July is the hottest month of the year, reaching an average temperature around 88.2 degrees, which ranks Norfolk as one of the hottest places to live in the state of Virginia. The most pleasant months of the year tend to be May, September, and June. Those months tend to be plenty warm for good beach weather, but not too hot. On average, each year, there's usually about 30 days out of the year where the average temperature goes over 90 degrees, and there's always a few days too where it goes over 100 degrees. That is usually going to fall in the month of July. On average, we usually only see about 1 or 2 days out of the year where it snows. Annually, Norfolk sees about 5.1 inches of snow each year. February would be the snowiest month of the year, and we may see 2-3 inches of snow at most. A lot of times though, it doesn't even stick to the ground. If you found this video to be helpful, do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you are moving to the area, I am a real estate agent. I've been serving this area for almost 10 years now. So you can reach out to me direct. My contact information is here on the screen. There's also a link in the description where you can book me for a consultation, no cost. I'm here to help you.